The darkness had finally claimed the room entirely, save for the faint yellow glow coming from the street lamp outside, which filtered through the wet glass and painted a distorted rectangle of light onto the floorboards. But it was not enough to see by, so the time had come to light the candle that stood ready on the bedside table. Reaching for the box of matches was a slow movement, the fingers brushing against the rough texture of the sliding drawer, and the sound of the match striking against the strip was a sharp scratch that briefly interrupted the silence, followed immediately by the flare of sulfur and the blossoming of a small teardrop of fire. Touching the flame to the wick required a steady hand, watching the black thread catch the light and hold it, the wax beginning to melt almost instantly, forming a small clear pool around the base of the flame. The light from the candle was soft and golden, creating a sphere of illumination that extended only a few feet, pushing back the shadows just enough to create a small island of visibility in the sea of night. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen in response, stretching upwards and leaning in as if curious about the light, dancing slightly with every flicker of the flame caused by the drafts that found their way through the cracks in the old window frames. With the light came a sense of intimacy, a feeling that the world had shrunk down to the four walls of this room and everything outside had ceased to exist. It was the perfect atmosphere for a task that required little thought but occupied the hands, a repetitive motion that would serve as a bridge to sleep. The sewing basket lay on the floor, a round woven container with a lid that creaked when it was lifted, revealing the jumble of spools and needles and scraps of fabric inside. Reaching in, the hand found a ball of gray yarn, coarse and scratchy wool that smelled of sheep and lanolin, a raw and natural scent that was grounding and real. Along with the yarn came the knitting needles, two slender rods of polished bone that felt warm and smooth to the touch, tools that had been used by generations of hands to create warmth against the cold. The project was a simple one, a sock of gray wool intended for the coming winter, a garment of utility rather than fashion, meant to be worn inside heavy boots to keep the frost at bay. Casting on the stitches was a familiar rhythm, a loop and a pull, a loop and a pull, counting under the breath 1, 2, 3, 4, until the needle was full of neat gray loops waiting to be worked. The metal of the needles clicked softly against each other, a rhythmic sound that was quieter than the clock, but faster, a click, click, click that marked the progress of the work. Knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one. The mantra of the work began, a simple pattern that required just enough focus to keep the mind from wandering, but not enough to wake it up fully. The wool slid through the fingers, rough against the skin, a constant tactile reminder of the work, while the eyes followed the movement of the needles back and forth, like a pendulum swinging. The candle flame flickered again, casting long dancing shadows of the hands against the wall, huge and distorted shapes that mimicked the knitting motion in a silent pantomime. The room was warm now, the heat from the fire downstairs having risen through the chimney and the heavy curtains holding it in, creating a cozy pocket of air that felt thick and sleepy. The invalid in the bed turned over with a heavy sigh, settling deeper into the pillows, the face relaxed and peaceful in the candlelight, the fever seeming to have broken or at least retreated for the night. The sound of the rain outside had changed its character once more, settling into a steady, gentle wash that sounded like white noise, a constant background hum that drowned out any sudden noises from the street. It was a night for staying in, a night for the cholera and the typhoid to rage outside, while inside there was only the click of the needles and the soft breath of the sleeper. The yarn unspooled from the ball slowly, a gray thread of time connecting the present moment to the finished object of the future. The mind began to drift to the origin of the wool, to the sheep grazing on a green hillside in the north, the wind blowing through their thick coats, the shepherd watching over them, the simple cycle of the seasons. Thinking of the sheep was soothing, a pastoral image that was far removed from the city and the sickness, a landscape of peace and quiet. The needles moved automatically now, the hands knowing what to do without instruction, the muscle memory taking over completely, allowing the conscious mind to float free. The sock grew slowly, row by row, a tube of gray fabric that hung down from the needles, lengthening with every passing minute, a physical manifestation of patience. A moth fluttered near the candle, drawn by the light, its wings dusty and gray, bumping softly against the wax, a tiny creature of the night seeking warmth. Watching the moth was a distraction from the knitting, the eyes following its erratic flight path around the flame, wondering at its persistence. It landed finally on the edge of the candlestick, folding its wings and becoming a small triangular shadow, perfectly still. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed the half-hour, a single soft ding that rippled through the silence and faded away, leaving the room quieter than before. The sensation of time passing was strange, elastic, stretching out and snapping back, measuring the night in rows of knitting rather than minutes. The eyes began to strain slightly in the dim light, the letters on the spine of the book on the table blurring, the pattern on the rug merging into a dark mass. It was a strain that was not unpleasant, a heaviness that promised sleep, a signal that the body was ready to shut down. Putting the knitting down for a moment to rest felt like a relief, the fingers uncurling from their grip on the needles, the blood flowing back into the tips. Rubbing the eyes with the palms of the hands produced a kaleidoscope of colors behind the closed lids, bursts of starbursts and geometric shapes that faded slowly into the black. The room smelled of melting wax now, a sweet and heavy scent that mixed with the lavender and the wool, creating a unique perfume of the night. The candle had burned down an inch, the wax pooling in the saucer and dripping down the side in long white tears that hardened as they fell. It was a measure of the time that had passed, a physical clock that melted away as the night wore on. Picking up the needles again felt like returning to a familiar friend, the rhythm reestablishing itself immediately. Click, 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 slide. The thoughts slowed down further, becoming disjointed and dreamlike, fragments of ideas that didn't connect, images that floated by like leaves on a stream. A wooden fence, a cup of tea, a blue ribbon, the sound of a bell. These things appeared and disappeared without context, simply existing in the flow of the mind. The body felt anchored to the chair, heavy and solid, while the spirit seemed to be lightening, lifting up slightly, hovering in the space between the body and the ceiling. The rain was a lullaby, a song without words that was being sung by the sky to the earth, a song of comfort and renewal. The city was a distant memory, a place of noise and stone that had no reality in this soft, warm room. There was only the here and the now, the circle of candlelight, the gray wool, the sleeping friend. The knitting was a form of prayer, a meditation with the hands, a way of marking time without rushing it. Row after row, the fabric grew, the loops interlocking, forming a strong and flexible web. It was a metaphor for life, perhaps, how the days interlocked to form a year, how the moments connected to form a life. But such thoughts were too philosophical for this late hour, and they drifted away, leaving only the sensation of the wool and the sound of the needles. The chin dropped again, hitting the chest with a soft thump, waking the mind briefly, but the eyes remained heavy, the lids refusing to open fully. The candle flame was mesmerizing, a living thing that danced and breathed, the blue center, the yellow tip, the halo of light. Staring into the flame was like staring into eternity, a focal point that absorbed all attention and left no room for worry. The sickness outside was forgotten, the fears of the day were banished, the uncertainties of tomorrow were postponed. There was only safety here, only warmth, only the slow and steady progress of the night. The cat, which had been sleeping on the windowsill, stretched and jumped down, landing on the rug with a soft thud that was barely audible, padding across the floor to curl up at the feet of the chair, a ball of orange fur seeking heat. The presence of the animal was comforting, a reminder of the simple needs of living things: food, warmth, sleep. The cat purred, a low vibration that could be felt through the floorboards, a rumble of contentment that added to the peace of the room. The knitting needles slowed down, the rhythm becoming more sporadic, the pauses between the clicks growing longer. The hands were tired, the fingers stiff, the coordination failing. It was time to stop, time to put the work away, time to surrender to the sleep that was waiting. Putting the knitting in the wool back into the basket was a final act of the day, a closing of the chapter. The lid of the basket creaked again, sealing the work away until the morning. The hands rested on the lap, empty and still. The candle was the only thing left to attend to, watching it burn down a little further, watching the wax drip, watching the flame dance. It seemed a shame to extinguish it, to plunge the room back into darkness, but it was necessary. Leaning forward, the breath was drawn in, a slow intake of air, and then released, a gentle puff that blew out the flame. The darkness rushed back, an instant and total, filling the room like water filling a sunken ship. But it was a friendly darkness, a soft and velvety darkness that wrapped around the body like a blanket. The smell of the extinguished candle smoke was sharp and acrid for a moment before dissipating into the air. The after-image of the flame burned on the retina, a small blue dot that faded slowly into the black. Now there was only the sound of the rain and the breathing and the ticking clock. The eyes closed, finally shutting out the dark room, turning inward to the dark mind. The chair was comfortable, the blanket was warm, the house was safe. The drift into sleep was inevitable, a slow slide down a gentle slope into the valley of dreams. The mind let go of the last thread of consciousness, the last awareness of the room, the last thought of the knitting. Down and down and down into the deep, quiet dark. The rain continued to fall, washing the world clean. The clock continued to tick, marking the time. The sleepers slept. The night held them all in its hand, gentle and firm. And the silence was perfect, complete and unbroken. A silence that was not empty, but full of peace. A silence that healed. A silence that lasted. The dreams that came were of soft gray wool and gentle rain and warm fires. Dreams that had no edges and no endings. Dreams that were just feelings of safety and rest. And so the night passed, hour by slow hour, while the world turned and the stars spun unseen behind the clouds, and the city waited for the dawn. But the dawn was far away, and the night was long and deep and sweet. And in the heart of the house, in the heart of the room, in the heart of the darkness, there was only sleep. Deep, restful, healing sleep. The kind of sleep that happens only when the world stops and the rain falls and there is nothing else to do, nothing else to be, just sleep. Thoughts drifted by like clouds in a summer sky, fluffy and white and formless, changing shape with every passing moment and never lingering long enough to be examined or understood. There was a memory of a summer day long ago, before the sickness came, when the sun shone bright and hot on the fields, and the air was filled with the buzzing of bees and the laughter of children playing by the creek. But that memory felt distant now, like a story read in a book, rather than something lived and experienced. The reality of the present was the gray light and the rain and the quiet room, and the feeling of heavy limbs and heavy eyes, and a mind that was slowly shutting down one window at a time. The concept of tomorrow seemed abstract and far away, a concept that belonged to a different world where time moved quickly and things happened with a sense of urgency. But here in this room, in this moment, there was only the eternal now, stretching out in all directions, like a calm sea under a windless sky.
The sound of the wind picking up outside was a low moan that rattled the window frames gently, a lullaby sung by the earth itself to soothe its children to sleep, and the rain intensified its drumming against the glass, creating a wall of white noise that blocked out every other sound and every other thought. It was a perfect isolation, a cocoon of safety spun from rain and mist and silence, where nothing could hurt and nothing could demand attention, and the only requirement was to exist and to breathe and to let go. The body felt heavy, sinking deeper into the cushion of the chair, the muscles relaxing one by one, starting from the toes and moving up through the legs and the back and the shoulders until the whole frame was limp and at rest. The eyelids fluttered and closed, shutting out the flickering firelight and the shadows on the wall, leaving only the darkness behind the eyes, a darkness that was soft and velvety and full of potential. The breath became shallow and even, a slow intake of air followed by a long, slow exhale that carried away the last remnants of tension and worry, leaving the mind empty and clear and ready for sleep. In the distance, the church bell tolled the hour, a deep and resonant sound that vibrated through the air and through the walls of the house, counting out the time that no longer mattered. 8, 9, 10 tolls that faded into the silence, leaving no trace behind. The city slept under the blanket of rain, the rows of houses dark and quiet, the streets empty and wet, the factories cold and still, the river flowing silently to the sea, all of it united in a great peaceful slumber that healed and restored. The sickness was there, yes, but it was just a part of the landscape, like the rain and the fog, a temporary condition that would pass in time, leaving the world washed clean and ready to begin again. But that was for later, for the future that had not yet arrived, and for now there was only the peace of the present, the comfort of the warm room, the sound of the rain, and the irresistible pull of sleep. The mind drifted further away, detaching from the physical world, floating in a space of pure consciousness where there were no words and no images, only a sense of being and a deep, profound rest. It was a sleep that went down to the bone, a sleep that knitted together the raveled sleeve of care, a sleep that was as deep and as old as the ocean. And so the night wore on, with the rain falling and the wind blowing and the world turning slowly on its axis, carrying the sleepers through the dark hours towards the dawn that would come eventually, but not yet, not for a long time. There was no need to wake, no need to stir, no need to do anything but drift and dream in the safety of the silent house, in the quiet town, in the middle of the gray and rainy season. The candle on the table sputtered and went out, its wick drowning in a pool of melted wax, releasing a thin trail of smoke that smelled of beeswax and burnt string, adding another layer to the sensory tapestry of the room. The darkness was complete now, save for the dying embers in the fireplace, which glowed with a dull red light, like the eyes of a sleepy dragon guarding its hoard of silence and peace. The temperature in the room dropped slightly, but the warmth of the tea and the heavy clothes kept the chill at bay, creating a cozy microclimate that was perfectly suited for hibernation. Even the mice in the walls were quiet, their scratching and skittering silenced by the heavy atmosphere of the night, leaving the house in a state of absolute stillness that was rare and precious. To listen to such silence was a gift, a chance to hear the blood rushing in the ears and the slow, steady beat of the heart, the internal rhythm of life that continued regardless of the external circumstances. It was a reminder that life was resilient, that it could endure the rain and the cold and the sickness and emerge on the other side intact and whole. But such profound thoughts were too heavy for a mind on the edge of sleep, and they slipped away like sand through fingers, leaving behind only a vague sense of reassurance and well-being. The boundaries of the room seemed to dissolve, the walls melting into the darkness, the ceiling lifting off to reveal the infinite expanse of the night sky, the floor dropping away to leave the body floating in a void of comfort and safety. It was a return to the womb, a return to the source, a return to the primal state of existence, where there was no separation between the self and the universe, only a seamless unity of being. The dreams that came were of soft gray wool and gentle rain and warm fires, dreams that had no edges and no endings, dreams that were just feelings of safety and rest. And so the night passed, hour by slow hour, while the world turned and the stars spun unseen behind the clouds, and the city waited for the dawn. But the dawn was far away, and the night was long and deep and sweet. And in the heart of the house, in the heart of the room, in the heart of the darkness, there was only sleep. Deep, restful, healing sleep. The kind of sleep that happens only when the world stops and the rain falls and there is nothing else to do, nothing else to be, just sleep. Thoughts drifted by like clouds in a summer sky, fluffy and white and formless, changing shape with every passing moment, and never lingering long enough to be examined or understood. There was a memory of a summer day long ago, before the sickness came, when the sun shone bright and hot on the fields, and the air was filled with the buzzing of bees and the laughter of children playing by the creek. But that memory felt distant now, like a story read in a book, rather than something lived and experienced. The reality of the present was the gray light and the rain and the quiet room, and the feeling of heavy limbs and heavy eyes, and a mind that was slowly shutting down one window at a time. The concept of tomorrow.
There was no fear in these dreams, no anxiety, no conflict, only a gentle exploration of the inner landscape, a wandering through the gardens of the subconscious, where the flowers bloomed in silence and the rivers flowed without a sound. The night deepened, the rain continued to fall, the wind continued to blow, and the world continued to sleep, held in the embrace of a peace that passed all understanding. And in the morning, when the light returned, it would be a soft and gentle light, filtering through the clouds and the mist, waking the world slowly and kindly, without the harsh glare of the sun, allowing the sleepers to rise gradually from the depths of their rest, refreshed and renewed, and ready to face whatever the new day might bring. But morning was still hours away, a distant promise on the horizon, and for now the night reigned supreme, the undisputed ruler of the earth and the sky and the soul. The rhythm of the rain was the heartbeat of the night, a steady pulse that sustained the world in its slumber, a lullaby that never ended, a story that had no beginning and no conclusion, only a continuous flow of sound and sensation that wrapped around the mind and guided it gently down into the dark. The dawn arrived not with a burst of sunlight, but with a subtle shifting of the gray scale, turning the black of the night into the slate of the morning, while the mist continued to cling to the window panes like a ghost that had forgotten how to leave. The rain had ceased its constant drumming, but the eaves of the house still dripped with a rhythmic plop, plop, plop into the puddles below, measuring out the time just as the clock did inside the hallway, where the shadows were slowly retreating into the corners. It was the hour when the city held its breath before the day truly began, a time of suspended animation where the streets were deserted and the chimneys had not yet begun to belch their smoke into the heavy air. Inside the room, the embers in the fireplace were cold and gray, a patchwork of faded fabrics that told the history of the family in scraps of wool and cotton, the breathing shallow and even, the sleep deep and restorative. To sit by the bedside was to enter a state of waiting that had no end, a vigil that required nothing but presence and patience, watching the chest rise and fall, watching the dust motes dance in the sliver of light that managed to penetrate the heavy velvet drapes. There was a book on the nightstand, a dense medical text bound in leather with gold lettering on the spine, but it remained closed,
its knowledge trapped between the pages, while the watcher simply sat and stared at the wallpaper, tracing the intricate floral patterns with the eyes over and over again until the vines and the petals seemed to move and writhe in the dim light. The pattern repeated every 12 inches, a loop of roses and thorns that spiraled endlessly upward, never reaching the ceiling, never ending, just continuing forever in a cycle of bloom and decay. The silence of the room was different from the silence of the kitchen. It was a heavy silence, a silence that was full of unsaid words and unprayed prayers, a silence that commanded respect and stillness. A fly buzzed lazily against a window pane, its tiny body bumping against the glass in a futile attempt to escape to the gray world outside, the sound a minor irritation that was easily ignored in the vast ocean of quiet. The ticking of the pocket watch on the table joined the rhythm of the house, a metallic heartbeat that was faster and more urgent than the grandfather clock downstairs, but just as relentless in its marking of the passing seconds. It was time to prepare the broth, a task that was simple yet demanded a certain level of attention, a ritual of nourishment that was as old as time itself. In the kitchen, the chicken bones were placed in the pot with water and a pinch of salt and a sprig of parsley. The ingredients simple and unadorned, meant to heal and to soothe rather than to excite the palate. The pot was placed on the back of the stove where the heat was gentle, allowing the liquid to simmer slowly for hours, releasing the essence of the bones into the water, turning it a pale golden color that smelled of home and safety. Skimming the surface of the broth was a hypnotic task, using a silver spoon to carefully remove the foam that rose to the top, a repetitive motion that required a steady hand and a quiet mind. The steam rose from the pot in curling tendrils, fogging the windows of the kitchen and adding to the sense of enclosure, of being cut off from the world outside, where the mist still swirled and the damp still clung to the brickwork. There was a comfort in knowing that the routines of the city continued, even in the time of sickness, that the milk was delivered and the bread was baked and the lamps were extinguished, even if the streets remained empty and the people remained hidden behind their doors. The sickness, known as typhoid or the cholera, or simply the fever, was a presence that was felt rather than seen, a heavy weight that pressed down on the roof of every house, creating an atmosphere of caution and quietude, where voices were kept low and movements were kept slow. In the sick room, the curtains were still drawn against the morning light, creating a twilight world where time seemed to stand still, and the air was thick with the smell of camphor and lavender and the faint metallic tang of medicine. The figure in the bed lay motionless under a heavy quilt, a patchwork of faded fabrics that told the history of the family in scraps of wool and cotton, the breathing shallow and even, the sleep deep and restorative. To sit by the bedside was to enter a state of waiting that had no end, a vigil that required nothing but presence and patience, watching the chest rise and fall, watching the dust motes dance in the sliver of light that managed to penetrate the heavy velvet drapes. There was a book on the nightstand, a dense medical text bound in leather with gold lettering on the spine, but it remained closed, its knowledge trapped between the pages, while the watcher simply sat and stared at the wallpaper, tracing the intricate floral patterns with the eyes over and over again, until the vines and the petals seemed to move and writhe in the dim light. The pattern repeated every 12 inches, a loop of roses and thorns that spiraled endlessly upward, never reaching the ceiling, never ending, just continuing forever in a cycle of bloom and decay. The silence of the room was different from the silence of the kitchen. It was a heavy silence, a silence that was full of unsaid words and unprayed prayers, a silence that commanded respect and stillness. A fly buzzed lazily against the window pane, its tiny body bumping against the glass in a futile attempt to escape to the gray world outside, the sound a minor irritation that was easily ignored in the vast ocean of quiet. The ticking of the pocket watch on the table joined the rhythm of the house, a metallic heartbeat that was faster and more urgent than the grandfather clock downstairs, but just as relentless in its marking of the passing seconds. It was time to prepare the broth, a task that was simple yet demanded a certain level of attention, a ritual of nourishment that was as old as time itself. In the kitchen, the chicken bones were placed in the pot with water and a pinch of salt and a sprig of parsley, the ingredients simple and unadorned, meant to heal and to soothe rather than to excite the palate. The pot was placed on the back of the stove where the heat was gentle, allowing the liquid to simmer slowly for hours, releasing the essence of the bones into the water, turning it a pale golden color that smelled of home and safety. Skimming the surface of the broth was a hypnotic task, using a silver spoon to carefully remove the foam that rose to the top, a repetitive motion that required a steady hand and a quiet mind. The steam rose from the pot in curling tendrils, fogging the windows of the kitchen and adding to the sense of enclosure, of being cut off from the world outside, where the mist still swirled and the damp still clung to the brickwork. There was a comfort in knowing that the routines of the city continued, even in the time of sickness, that the milk was delivered and the bread was baked and the lamps were extinguished, even if the streets remained empty and the people remained hidden behind their doors. The sickness, known as typhoid or the cholera or simply the fever, was a presence that was felt rather than seen, a heavy weight that pressed down on the roof of every house, creating an atmosphere of caution and quietude, where voices were kept low and movements were kept slow. In the sick room, the curtains were still drawn against the morning light, creating a twilight world where time seemed to stand still, and the air was thick with the smell of camphor and lavender and the faint metallic tang of medicine. The figure in the bed lay motionless under a heavy quilt, a patchwork of faded fabrics that told the history of the family in scraps of wool and cotton, the breathing shallow and even, the sleep deep and restorative. To sit by the bedside was to enter a state of waiting that had no end, a vigil that required nothing but presence and patience, watching the chest rise and fall, watching the dust motes dance in the sliver of light that managed to penetrate the heavy velvet drapes. There was a book on the nightstand, a dense medical text bound in leather.
The steam rose from the pot in curling tendrils, fogging the windows of the kitchen and adding to the sense of enclosure, of being cut off from the world outside, where the mist still swirled and the damp still clung to the brickwork. There was no hurry to finish the broth, for the day stretched out ahead long and empty, with no appointments to keep and no visitors to expect, only the slow passage of the sun across the sky, hidden behind the clouds. The newspaper lay on the table unread, its headlines speaking of politics and wars in distant lands, matters that felt incredibly trivial and remote compared to the reality of the soup pot and the ticking clock and the rain that had started to fall again, a fine misty drizzle that coated everything in a sheen of moisture. Reading the paper seemed like too much effort, the eyes sliding over the columns of text without absorbing the meaning, the mind refusing to engage with the complexities of the world when the immediate environment was so simple and so demanding of quiet. It was better to watch the steam rise, better to listen to the water boil, better to count the tiles on the floor one by one, noting the cracks and the stains that marked the passage of years and the tread of feet. The cat came into the kitchen, stretching its long orange body and rubbing against the legs of the chair, a silent companion in the lonely house, its purr a low rumble that added a bass note to the symphony of domestic sounds.
It jumped up onto the windowsill and settled there, tucking its paws underneath its chest, closing its eyes, and drifting off to sleep with an enviable ease, teaching a lesson in relaxation that the human mind found hard to learn. The smell of the simmering broth filled the house now, a savory aroma that was the very definition of comfort, promising warmth and strength to the invalid upstairs and to the watcher in the kitchen. It was a smell that recalled childhood days of being tucked in bed with a fever, the cool hand of a mother on the forehead, the taste of hot soup on a silver spoon, the feeling of being cared for and protected from the harshness of the world. That feeling was what was needed now, a regression to a simpler state of dependency and trust, a letting go of the need to control, and a surrender to the slow healing processes of nature. The doctor would come later in the afternoon, his buggy clattering down the street, his presence a reassurance that science and knowledge were doing their best, but until then there was only the broth and the wait. The hours of the morning passed indistinguishably, one melting into the other, without any clear demarcation, marked only by the reduction of the liquid in the pot and the shifting of the light in the room from gray to a slightly lighter shade of gray. To stand by the stove and stir the pot was to be a monk in a monastery of domesticity, performing a sacred duty with humility and grace, finding meaning in the mundane and peace in the repetition. The spoon scraped against the bottom of the pot, a soft metal-on-metal sound that was strangely satisfying, a confirmation of reality in a world that felt increasingly dreamlike. The facial steam was an unintended benefit, the warm moisture softening the skin and opening the pores, relaxing the muscles of the face that had been held tight with worry and fatigue. It was a day for soft things, for wool sweaters and flannel sheets and whispered words and gentle touches, a day when the hard edges of life were wrapped in cotton wool and kept at a distance. The world of commerce and industry, the world of factories and trains and telegraphs seemed to belong to another planet, a noisy, chaotic planet that had no place in this quiet kitchen with its smelling soup and its sleeping cat. Here the timeline was measured in heartbeats and breaths and the slow drip of the faucet, a timeline that was organic and human rather than mechanical and relentless. The thought of the outside world was exhausting, the noise and the bustle and the demands of society, so it was pushed away, pushed out into the fog, leaving only the inner circle of the home and the hearth. A bird landed on the window ledge outside, a small brown sparrow with wet feathers, looking in with bead-like eyes for a moment, before flying away, disappearing into the mist as quickly as it had arrived, a fleeting connection with the wilder world. The broth was ready now, rich and clear and golden, a liquid gold that was more valuable than any coin in this time of sickness. It was ladled into a china bowl, the steam rising in a cloud, the spoon placed beside it on the tray, along with a napkin of white linen. Carrying the tray up the stairs was a careful operation, placing one foot in front of the other, avoiding the creaky board on the third step, balancing the liquid so as not to spill a drop. The sick room was exactly as it had been left, quiet and dim, and smelling of lavender, the invalid still sleeping, the chest still rising and falling in that steady rhythm. Placing the tray on the bedside table made a small clink sound that seemed loud in the silence, but the sleeper did not stir. To sit again in the chair, to wait for the waking, to watch the steam rise from the bowl, to listen to the rain start to fall harder against the roof, this was the entirety of existence. There was no boredom here, only a deep and profound stillness, a suspension of time, a resting of the soul. The pattern on the wallpaper was waiting to be traced again, the rose and the thorn, the leaf and the vine, a labyrinth for the eyes to follow while the mind floated free. The day was a long river flowing slowly to the sea, and the boat was drifting without oars, carried by the current, under the gray sky, past the silent banks, towards a destination that was not yet in sight and did not need to be known. You walk back along the gravel path, the lighthouse receding into the mist behind you, a silent sentinel watching over the sea. You retrace your steps past the dunes, past the heaving ocean, the sound of the waves providing a steady rhythm for your walk. The light is fading now, the gray sky turning to a deep charcoal, the world settling in for the night. You find yourself back in the archive room, the brass telescope still in your hand. You place it back on the shelf in the cabinet and close the glass door, the latch clicking softly. You stand in the center of the room, feeling the weight of the driftwood in your pocket, a reminder of the quiet tower and the endless sea. You feel heavy, your eyelids drooping, your body ready for rest. But there is one more place to go, one more map to follow. You turn to the final wall of the archive, where a large tapestry hangs, depicting a sprawling meadow under a moonlit sky. You reach out and touch the fabric, feeling the rough weave of the wool, and as you do, the walls of the archive seem to dissolve, melting into the darkness.
You are now standing at the edge of that meadow, the grass silver in the moonlight, the air cool and crisp. Fireflies blink slowly in the tall grass, tiny points of yellow light that drift lazily on the breeze. You begin to walk into the meadow, the grass brushing against your knees, soft and wet with dew. There is a path here, barely visible, a thin line of flattened grass that leads towards a distant line of trees. You walk slowly, watching the fireflies, listening to the chorus of crickets that fills the night air, a steady rhythmic chirping that sounds like the heartbeat of the earth. You reach the trees, a grove of ancient birches with white bark that glows in the moonlight. In the center of the grove is a small clearing, and in the clearing is a stone circle, a fire pit that has been cold for 100 years. You sit on one of the stones surrounding the pit, the rock cool and solid beneath you. You look up at the sky, seeing the same stars that were on the map in the lighthouse, connecting the dots in your mind. You feel a profound sense of connection, a feeling that you are exactly where you are meant to be. You take the driftwood from your pocket and place it in the center of the fire pit, not to burn, but to rest. It belongs here, with the stones and the trees and the stars. You lie back in the grass, looking up at the moon, feeling the earth holding you, supporting you. The chirping of the crickets becomes a lullaby, the blinking of the fireflies a hypnotic show. Your eyes grow heavy, so heavy that you can no longer keep them open. You let them close, and you drift, floating on the sea of grass, sinking deeper and deeper into the quiet, into the dark, into the sleep that has been waiting for you all along. The transition is seamless, like a cloud passing over the moon, and you find yourself no longer in the grass, but seated in a high-backed armchair upholstered in crushed red velvet, the fabric soft and warm against your skin. You are inside a train carriage, an old-fashioned Pullman car from a bygone era, where the walls are paneled in dark polished mahogany, and the lamps emit a low golden glow that barely illuminates the corners of the room. The train is moving, but very slowly, a rhythmic rocking motion that sways you side to side, a cradle of wood and steel moving through a silent world. You look out the window, framed by heavy curtains with gold tassels, and you see that the world outside has turned to white, a landscape of deep, pristine snow that stretches to the horizon. It is snowing heavily, great soft flakes drifting down from a slate-gray sky, covering the earth in a thick, sound-dampening blanket. The train moves through a forest of pine trees, their branches bowed low under the weight of the snow, creating a tunnel of white and green that you pass through with a hushed whisper of metal on iron rails. There is no sound of an engine, only the rhythmic click-clack of the wheels, a steady metronome that measures the passing of time in beats of comfort and safety. You are the only passenger in this car, perhaps on the entire train, and this solitude is not lonely but luxurious, a private journey through a frozen world. On the small table in front of you, secured by a brass rim, sits a porcelain cup of tea, steam rising from it in lazy spirals that dance in the dim light. You pick up the cup, feeling the warmth radiating into your palms, and you take a sip, the taste of chamomile and honey coating your throat, warming you from the inside out. You set the cup down and decide to explore, standing up on legs that feel heavy and relaxed, moving with the sway of the train. You walk down the aisle, your feet sinking into the thick, patterned carpet that runs the length of the car, muffling your footsteps completely. You pass rows of empty seats, each one inviting and plush, until you reach the door at the end of the carriage. You push the heavy wood and glass door open, stepping into the vestibule, where the air is cooler and smells faintly of coal smoke and cold iron. You open the next door and enter the observation car, a room with walls made almost entirely of glass, offering an uninterrupted view of the winter wonderland outside. At the very end of the car, there is a curved bench facing the rear window, watching the tracks recede into the distance. You sit there, watching the two steel rails emerging from beneath the train, parallel lines that stretch back into the white infinity, instantly covered by the falling snow. It is mesmerizing to watch the tracks disappear, a visual reminder that the past is gone and only the present moment exists, rolling forward at a slow, steady pace. On the bench next to you, someone has left a small wooden puzzle box, intricate and inlaid with mother-of-pearl. You pick it up, the wood smooth and cool, and you turn it over in your hands, looking for the seam, the hidden latch that will open it. There is no rush to solve it. The feeling of the box in your hands is enough, the texture of the wood, the way the light catches the pearl inlay. You gently slide a panel to the right, then a small piece to the left, your fingers moving intuitively, guided by a sense of calm curiosity. With a soft click, the box opens. Inside, resting on a bed of blue velvet, is a silver pocket watch on a long chain. You lift it out, the silver heavy and cold, and you press the catch to open the face. The watch has stopped, the hands frozen at a time that no longer matters, and the ticking has ceased, leaving only a beautiful silence. The face of the watch is not numbered with hours, but with words: rest, dream, drift, sleep. You run your thumb over the smooth glass of the watch face, tracing the words, internalizing their command. You place the watch in your vest pocket, the weight of it a grounding presence against your chest. You stand up and leave the observation car, walking back through the quiet train, the rhythmic swaying lulling you into a state of deep drowsiness. You return to your original seat, the red velvet welcoming you back, molding to the shape of your body. You look out the window again, the snow falling thicker now, blurring the trees into soft gray shapes, the world outside losing its definition, becoming a canvas of pure white silence. The click-clack of the wheel seems to be getting softer, slower, fading into the background of your consciousness. You lean your head back against the winged headrest, your neck supported, your shoulders dropping. The steam from the tea has stopped rising, the cup sitting still on the table. The golden light of the lamp seems to dim, turning to a soft amber, then a deep twilight blue. The train is taking you nowhere, and it is taking you everywhere, a journey without a destination, a travel through the landscape of sleep. You feel the heavy eyelids sliding shut, blocking out the white snow, the dark wood, the golden light. You are safe, you are warm, you are moving through the quiet. The rhythm of the train becomes the rhythm of your breath, in and out,
slow and steady. You drift deeper into the upholstery, deeper into the warmth, deeper into the peace that you have found on this silent, snowy track. The train comes to a final, imperceptible stop, the wheels ceasing their rotation with a sigh of steam that wraps around the carriage like a soft, white cloud. You stand up from the velvet chair, feeling rested and heavy, and you walk to the door, which slides open silently to reveal a platform made of smooth, polished marble that glows faintly in the twilight.
You step out onto the stone, the air cool and still, smelling of old stone and distant rain, and you walk across the empty platform towards a grand archway carved from gray granite. There are no ticket collectors, no crowds, no noise, just the sound of your own footsteps echoing softly in the vast space. You pass through the archway and find yourself not in a station, but in a library of immense proportions, a cathedral of books with shelves that rise up into the shadows of the vaulted ceiling high above. The air here is dry and smells of parchment, leather bindings, and the dust of centuries, a comforting and studious scent that makes you want to whisper. You walk down a long aisle between the towering shelves, running your fingertips lightly over the spines of the books, feeling the rough texture of cloth, the smoothness of leather, the ridges of gold-embossed titles that have faded with time. The light comes from tall, narrow windows that let in beams of blue moonlight, illuminating floating dust motes that drift in the air like tiny stars. You are looking for something, though you are not sure what, guided only by the feeling of peace and the slow rhythm of your own breathing. You reach the center of the library, where a large spiral staircase made of wrought iron winds its way upward, its steps covered in a thick, dark carpet. You begin to climb, your hand sliding up the cold metal railing, round and round, ascending slowly into the upper reaches of the room. At the top of the stairs, there is a small circular gallery with a single reading desk illuminated by a brass lamp with a green glass shade. You approach the desk, the floorboards creaking softly under your weight, a sound that emphasizes the silence rather than breaking it. On the desk sits a large globe, its surface sepia-toned and covered in the lines of ancient maps, showing countries and oceans that have different names in this quiet world. You reach out and gently spin the globe, watching the continents blur into a swirl of beige and blue, the rotation slow and smooth on its axis. As the globe slows to a stop, you notice a small latch near the equator, barely visible against the map lines. You press the latch with your thumb, and the globe opens on a hidden hinge, revealing a hollow interior lined with red silk. Inside the globe rests a single, perfect pearl, large and lustrous, glowing with a soft inner light. You pick up the pearl, feeling its coolness against your palm, rolling it between your fingers, marveling at its perfect smoothness, its complete lack of flaws. This is the treasure of the library, a sphere of calm hidden within a sphere of the world. You place the pearl back into its silk bed and close the globe, the latch clicking shut with a sound of finality. You sit down in the heavy wooden chair behind the desk, the wood warm and polished. You rest your arms on the desk and lower your head, closing your eyes, listening to the silence of the millions of books surrounding you, each one holding a story that is sleeping just like you. The scent of the old paper wraps around you, the dim light of the green lamp feels like a protective bubble, and you feel yourself sinking, drifting, floating down through the layers of the library, down through the stories, down into the deep, quiet, wordless dark of sleep. The library fades away into the shadows, the smell of old paper replaced slowly by the heavy, sweet scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine, and you find yourself standing inside a magnificent glass greenhouse, a Victorian structure of iron and crystal that glows softly in the moonlight. The air here is warm and humid, clinging gently to your skin like a soft blanket, relaxing your muscles instantly with its tropical embrace.
Outside the glass walls, a gentle rain has begun to fall, the drops tapping against the panes with a rhythmic, musical sound. Tap, 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 a lullaby of water and glass that surrounds you completely. You begin to walk down the central aisle, the path beneath your feet paved with old red bricks that are worn smooth in the center from years of slow, careful footsteps. On either side of you, lush green plants rise up from terracotta pots, their leaves broad and waxy, glistening with moisture in the dim light. There are ferns that unfurl like fiddleheads, orchids that hang from the ceiling in baskets of moss, and vines that twist and climb up the iron pillars, reaching for the roof. You walk slowly, your hand brushing against the soft leaves, feeling the cool texture of the plants, connecting with the silent life that surrounds you. The sound of the rain intensifies slightly, a steady drumming that washes away all other thoughts, leaving only the present moment and the green stillness. You stop in front of an ancient potting bench made of weathered teak, its surface stained with the soil of 1,000 repottings. On the bench sits a row of small clay pots, empty and waiting. But one pot at the end is overturned. You reach out and lift the pot, the clay rough and cool against the fingers. Underneath the pot, hidden in the recess of the wood, is a small rusted metal tin, the kind used to hold mints or tobacco in a forgotten time. You pick up the tin, the metal warm from the humid air, and you pry the lid open with a soft pop. Inside, resting on a bed of dry moss, is a piece of golden amber, polished and smooth, warm to the touch. You hold the amber up to the moonlight filtering through the rain-streaked glass, and you see a tiny ancient insect trapped inside, preserved forever in a golden moment of silence. This is the treasure of the greenhouse, a drop of time caught in resin, a memory of a sunlit day held safe through the centuries. You place the amber back into its silk bed and close the tin, the latch clicking shut with a sound of finality. You sit down in the heavy wooden chair behind the desk, the wood warm and polished. You rest your arms on the desk and lower your head, closing your eyes, listening to the silence of the millions of books surrounding you, each one holding a story that is sleeping, just like you. The scent of the old paper wraps around you, the dim light of the green lamp feels like a protective bubble, and you feel yourself sinking, drifting, floating down through the layers of the library, down through the stories, down into the deep, quiet, wordless dark of sleep. The sound of the rain on the greenhouse roof begins to fade gently into the distance as the scene shifts around you once more, the humidity and warmth dissolving into a cooler, crisper air that smells of polished wood and machine oil. You find yourself standing on a narrow cobblestone street in an old, quiet city where it is always evening, the street lamps casting a warm amber glow on the wet stones beneath your feet. You begin to walk down the street, your boots making a solid, rhythmic sound on the cobblestones. Click-clack, click-clack, a sound that echoes softly against the brick buildings that line the road. The shop windows are dark and sleepy, filled with old books and dusty antiques, but there is one shop at the end of the lane that has a faint light burning in the window. Above the door swings a wooden sign shaped like a pocket watch, creaking slightly in the gentle breeze. You approach the door painted a deep glossy green, and you reach out to turn the heavy brass knob. The door opens with the chime of a small bell, a tinkling sound that announces your arrival to the silence. You step inside, and the door closes behind you, shutting out the street, the breeze, and the world. You are now standing in the center of an old clockmaker's workshop, a room filled from floor to ceiling with clocks of every shape and size. There are tall grandfather clocks standing like sentinels against the walls, their pendulums swinging back and forth with a deep, slow rhythm, tick-tock, tick-tock. There are cuckoo clocks carved from dark wood hanging on the walls, their weights suspended on long chains. There are mantel clocks made of marble and brass sitting on shelves, ticking with a faster, lighter sound. Tick, 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 tick. The air is thick with the sound of time, a cacophony of rhythms that somehow blend into a soothing, continuous white noise, a heartbeat of the room that matches your own. You walk slowly through the aisles of clocks, your hands clasped behind your back, observing the details of the craftsmanship. You stop to admire a grandfather clock made of mahogany, the wood polished to a mirror-like shine, reflecting the dim light of the overhead lamps. You watch the pendulum swing left, right, a motion that is perfectly consistent, perfectly calm, never rushing, never lagging, just existing in the moment.
You move deeper into the shop, past a counter covered in tools, tiny screwdrivers, tweezers, magnifying glasses, and spools of brass wire. The smell of the oil used to lubricate the gears is stronger here, a clean, metallic scent that feels grounding and real. You see a heavy velvet curtain at the back of the shop, partially drawn back to reveal a smaller, more private workspace. You step through the curtain into this inner sanctum, a room that feels even quieter, even stiller than the main shop. Here, there is a large workbench made of thick oak, scarred and stained by centuries of work. On the bench sits a single disassembled clock, its brass gears and springs laid out in a precise pattern on a piece of white felt. You sit down on the high wooden stool in front of the bench, feeling the wood support you. You look at the gears, marveling at their complexity, the tiny teeth that mesh together to measure the passing of seconds. You pick up a pair of tweezers and gently lift a small gear, holding it up to the light. It is no bigger than a fingernail, yet it is essential to the whole mechanism. You place it back down on the felt, fitting it perfectly into its designated spot. As you do, you notice a small, loose floorboard beneath the workbench. You lean down and pry it up gently with your fingers. Underneath, in the dusty space between the joists, is a small wooden box made of cedar, smelling faintly of the forest. You lift the box out and place it on the workbench. The lid is carved with a pattern of stars and moons. You open the box slowly, the hinges moving stiffly. Inside, resting on a cushion of blue silk, is not a clock part, but a small silver key, intricate and beautiful, with a handle shaped like an owl. This is the treasure of the clockmaker, the key to a time that has not yet come, or perhaps a time that has already passed. You run your thumb over the silver owl, feeling the cool metal, the tiny details of the feathers. You place the key back in the box and close the lid, returning the box to its hiding place under the floorboard, pressing the wood back down until it is flush. You sit back on the stool, resting your elbows on the workbench, and you simply listen. You listen to the ticking of the thousands of clocks in the other room, a symphony of seconds that surrounds you. The sound is hypnotic, a steady river of time that flows over you, washing away your stress, washing away your thoughts. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Your eyelids begin to feel heavy, as if tiny weights have been placed upon them. The rhythm of the clocks begins to slow down in your mind, the spaces between the ticks becoming longer, deeper, more silent. You are safe here, surrounded by the steady pulse of the universe. The room seems to dim, the light fading to a soft gray, then a deep charcoal. You rest your head on your arms on the workbench, the wood cool against your forehead. The ticking becomes a lullaby, a soft rhythmic patter, like rain, like a heartbeat, like footsteps fading away. You are drifting now, floating on the sound of time, moving away from the waking world, sinking deeper into the comfort of the workshop, deeper into the silence, deeper into the long, slow, uninterrupted sleep
that you have been seeking. The rhythmic ticking of the clocks fades slowly behind you as you step out of the green door and back into the cool night air, the street now empty and silent, save for the distant sound of wind moving through the eaves of the buildings. You continue walking down the cobblestone lane, your boots moving with a heavy, relaxed rhythm, passing closed storefronts and darkened windows, until you reach a small, unassuming building made of rough gray stone at the very edge of the town. There is no sign above the door, only a faint smell of wet earth and wood smoke drifting from the chimney, a scent that triggers a deep primitive memory of warmth and shelter. You push open the heavy oak door, which swings inward on silent iron hinges, and you step into a large, dimly lit pottery studio that feels like entering a cave of comfort. The air here is warm and dry, heated by a large brick kiln that sits in the far corner, radiating a gentle, steady heat that wraps around you like a heavy wool blanket, instantly relaxing the tension in your shoulders. The room is filled with long wooden tables covered in canvas, and shelves that line the walls from floor to ceiling are packed with rows of unglazed bowls, vases, and cups, their surfaces a pale, dusty gray in the moonlight that streams through the high, narrow windows. You walk slowly down the center of the room, your footsteps muffled by the layer of fine clay dust that covers the floorboards like a soft carpet. You run your hand along the edge of a workbench, feeling the texture of the dry clay, a fine, chalky powder that coats your fingertips and connects you to the earth.